I'm Jerry, and I'm recovering well from the elk attack. Dallas and I did not compare notes, and except for the fact that we were both going to tell the bookstore story. That really started when David and I delivered a car to our father-in-law, Lawrence, back in 1986. He had a new car, and he was living in Arizona at the time, so David and I drove that car all the way across the country to deliver it to Lawrence. But David said he would do all the driving if I would read to him on the way. And so I read him a book, and he said we need to get another one, so we stopped at a Christian bookstore to get a book. And this was pre-Left Behind, so I wasn't recognized by my face. I mean, the bookstore people knew my name, but David pulled that thing at every bookstore we stopped at across the country. And I couldn't stop laughing, because he would say, are his books worth more or less now that he's passed? They'd say, he's passed. And he'd say, yeah, gored by a wild elk. And I would snicker, and he would say, I don't think it's very funny, sir. I appreciated the man. You can just hear him do it. So then he got home and did it with Dallas, made me stay in the car because they would have recognized me there. Well, David loved life. He loved innovation. He always wanted the best and the latest and the most efficient way of doing things, whether that was equipment or scientific ways to farm. He loved humor. You've all seen the twinkle in his eye. He loved people. He was curious. And he cared enough to ask personal questions. Every time I was with him, he would ask me about my health, my marriage, and my spiritual life. And I felt like I had to answer. Bottom line, he was passionate. You know, there are 4 of us that married Whiteford girls. And we are all of very disparate professions and locations. Don is the lawyer, and I'm the writer, and Daryl was the business executive, and of course David was the farmer. But we had a lot in common. We all love God. We're all devoted husbands our entire adult lives. We loved our wives unashamedly for all that time, and would say so. And we're all ferociously proud fathers. But we surviving 3 brothers-in-law agree on this one thing that set David apart. He was by far the most mischievous of the 4 of us. Coming down here 2 or 3 times a year for 45 years was always a treat, primarily because of David and the fun that I knew would ensue. He could play out a prank longer and more outrageously than anybody I ever knew. And he Tom Sawyered me. Remember the scene in Tom Sawyer where he's painting the fence and he makes it like it's the most incredible, important thing to do, and nobody else can do it but him, and everybody else wants a chance to try, so they wind up painting the fence for Tom. I can remember jumping in the pickup truck with David one time because he had errands to run in town. He had to buy some feed or seed or whatever and do some things. And so he said, now when I get to the seed store, he said, you just stay in the truck because I know as a city guy that you're not used to this much physical activity. And he said, I can't imagine that you've lifted anything 50 pound, these 50-pound bags. And I'm thinking, I've lifted 50-pound bags of water softener salt sometimes, you know. And yeah, I work in an office, but I can be a man. We pull up, he goes in to talk, and he says, I'm getting these bags here, and he says, don't try to climb in the truck because, being a city guy. So I hop up there, and the guy's tossing me 50-pound bags of seed, and I'm stacking them all and everything. I get down off that truck, and I realize he Tom Sawyered me. He didn't do a lick of that work. And I didn't want to admit he was right. The next day I could hardly move. It was rough. I think my most fun story with David, beyond the bookstore story, was little sister Marcia, my youngest sister-in-law, and I would play a game with David where it was just a simple parlor trick. He put 3 cards out on the table, and Marcia would, or David would point to one of them when Marcia wasn't looking, and then from what I would say, Marcia would guess which one it was. And he could not catch on to how that was happening. And so he would get very upset. There's no way she could know that. And I'd say, well, let's try it again. And he says, well, I want her to go in the other room. So she'd go in the other room, and he'd point to one of them, and I'd say, all right, Marcia, can you guess? She'd go, it's the first one. He'd go, that's impossible. It just drove him crazy. And there's one part of the game where if I don't say anything, it's the middle card. And he says, this time I'm going to point at one, and I don't want you to say anything. And he pointed to the middle card, and I went, and Marcia calls out, it's the middle one. He goes, that's demonic. So you got to tell me how you do that. That's a trick. How do you do that? And I said, next time I come down, I'll tell you. So next time I came down, he grabbed me and he said, you promised to tell me. I said, I'm going to tell you. You were right. It's demonic. And so like Dallas thought when he heard David's passing, that now he knows the truth. Now David knows how I did that trick too. But I never told him. Well, when we began hearing of David's rapid decline, we wished it was one of his pranks and not the cruel trick that human frailty plays on too many of us long before our time. In his blank stare, we would watch for that twinkle or that wink, hoping he'd pulled a fast one on us one more time. But in the end, he was mercifully taken rather than having to suffer an existence that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, let alone on somebody you love that much. So we remember David in his prime, loving his wife, loving his family, loving his Lord, and loving life. Imagine how much he's loving it now.